afternoon to everybody. Welcome back to these lectures, which now by now are part of your life, because it's the 12th lecture that we offer, and many of you have been very faithful in following all of them. So today my topic will be humanity and the environment, interdisciplinary stress on it, interdisciplinary perspectives on ecology, stress on it as well, of course. So the best way I found to begin, also given that we are just after lunch, it's 3 o'clock and the weather is warming up because we are almost in summer. So the best way I found to believe is to talk to you, or well, better said, to show you a short movie on this, which will be one of the protagonists of my presentation, the beaver. The beaver. So let me, and yeah, I mean, the sense of the movie I will show to you is in the very last sentence that you will hear from the movie. So the beaver is not a species, it's an ecosystem, and this is the key point. So let me ask from this and try to launch this movie.
It's sometimes difficult to remember, even to take in actually all the many biodiversity benefits of beavers. You know, the species including bats and kingfishers and herons, and that the number of small mammals that live next to the water is higher in beaver areas. And so because the small mammals are benefiting, that means that the owls and the other raptors that live on small mammals are also benefiting. So the beavers came to Banff in 2002. It's changed the hydrology. The water's all held. We now have so many pools, where before we just had a ditch which in summer was large, was almost dry very often. We now have all these pools, and each of these pools is obviously full of wildlife. I mean, there are all these little things like caddisfly larvae, you know, which are aquatic, the aquatic larval stage of so many invertebrates. And these are food for little fishes, and the little fishes in turn are food for the heron, and so on. And actually you also get this complexification, if that's a word, of the surrounding land. So you end up with these dead trees and felled trees and horizontal trees and broken bits of tree, and makes a fantastic contribution to biodiversity. It's habitat for woodpeckers, potentially for owls, and a huge number of fungi and mosses and all kinds of things flourish, lichen and so on, insects. So they, you know, may look a bit destructive to the untutored eye. This is really rather a wonderful thing that beavers do for us. Beavers will also take wood and put it into the water as a food source for them. That's because in winter that's their source of food, not the outer bark, but the sort of inner layer, which is quite nutritious. I think it's not very nutritious, but it gets them through the winter. And so they will take food and they will stick these sticks in the water as a sort of larder. And actually one of the things that's going through the beaver's mind is that maybe the water will freeze over in a hard winter, and then they won't be able to get out to get their food. So they like to keep some of the food in the mud at the bottom of the pond. And all this wood in the water is tremendously beneficial. It creates an absolute cascade of biodiversity. And actually, amongst the many species that it benefits salmon. Not here, this isn't a salmon river. It's a trout river, but not a salmon river. The coarse woody debris in the water is actually a vital component for creating habitat for the parr of salmonids. And so it goes on. You know, the trophic cascade on the one hand and the kind of the ecological pyramid on the other. You've just got a an extraordinarily important species, which is almost more than a keystone species. Heidi Perriman, who's a Californian beaver expert, she just says the beaver is not an animal, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem in itself.
Okay, thank you. This was just to begin lightly our topic, but this movie actually introduces us into the topic of today. As far as ecology actually is originally a branch of the life sciences focusing on the relationships between the organism and the and their environment. So this will be the perspective in which I will discuss the issue of ecology. And of course, there's another, I chosen this movie because there's another message that it seems to me it conveys, which is the point that the organisms, every organism, can play a very powerful role in shaping the environment in which they live. And this is something that we should try to keep in mind as much as possible. Well, we will see later on which are the implications. The beaver will come back at a certain point of my presentation from another perspective. But now let me remember also, let me stress also that the presentation that I will offer to you today is, in my view, extremely strictly linked to my previous lecture, the one on human uniqueness. In a sense, what I will tell to you today is another perspective on the same topic. But this other perspective will take us along a journey that is worth pursuing. If you remember, in my previous lecture, which was, I think, 4 lectures ago, talking about human uniqueness, cultural evolution, I stressed the issue, the importance, the character of culture, or human cultural evolution, the ability to go beyond necessity. This is a key topic, and we, let me say, show this, we display this even in our relationships with our environment, because we are able to deeply modify and affect our environment. We will see this. We shape entire landscapes for our goals, for our tasks, and sometimes we also modify this extremely profoundly. You see this very beautiful alpine landscape, but it's actually found in the middle of the Arabic desert. And you can see here the radiators cooling down the environment. So this is, of course, something that should make us reflect a little on how we actually manage our relationships with the environment. But it also points to the fact that we also in our relationships with the environment are able to look and to pursue what we really don't need. And this is an issue that it's important to keep in mind. You certainly remember the 2 models of cultural evolution that I presented to you in my last lecture. So the closed one, in which there's a strict dependence among these 4 levels. And so this implies that culture should be regarded just as an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of genetic evolution, and the open one. And here the stress was on the notions of cultural acceptation and cultural new reuse as the ways in which culture by itself is able to back effect on human constitution at the cognitive level and at the anatomical level, at the brain level specifically. At a certain point, in my previous lecture, I formulated a bunch of objections, if you remember properly, and then I mentioned that the first reply to those objections would have concerned the extended evolutionary synthesis, so this novel theoretical approach about how biological evolution works. But at the time, I declared that I will have deepened into this topic today. So this is what I would like to do now. This is an environment. This is actually the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua. This is a deeply modified environment. Actually, we built this entirely. And this has many functions. Of course, it's a church. It's a place to praise the Lord. It's a place for liturgy. It's a place for cultivating our faith. But it also has another value that I would like to stress today. And the value I would like to stress today about the Scrovegni Chapel is quite similar to this one. This is King's College in Cambridge. This is a university. So this is a place where we educate ourselves. And actually, along the history of our cultural evolution, we shaped the environment extensively, repeatedly, and virtually at every step in which we did this, we modified ourselves. So the specific perspective that I want to take today in talking about ecology and the relationship between humanity and the environment is this one. I mean, is the idea that ecology for the human being has a pedagogical character, has a pedagogical value. So I would like to propose to you the idea of a pedagogical ecology, which is not ecological pedagogy. I mean, it's not environmental education. It's quite the reverse. It's the pedagogical value that the environment can have for us. So these are the topics I will focus on today. First of all, a strict organism-environment complementarity. This is a topic that current biology stresses a lot. And I will look into this from two complementary points of view. Stressing that the organism modifies the environment, but also stressing that the environment modifies the organism. Sorry, there's a typo there, but I can fix this immediately. Okay, sorry. Pardon? Yes, indeed. Yes, now I got it. So the environment modifies the organism in two ways, both downstream and upstream. I will explain to you what I mean to this. Then I would like to have a brief sketch on the modes or theories of evolution that today seems to me compete on this field. And then I will get to the point. And the point for me can be formulated by saying that the human being modifies the environment, as any other species do, to the aim of modifying itself. So this is the specificity that I will propose to you from the point of view of the human-environment relationships. And then I will offer to you what I like to call a pedagogical criterion for integral ecology. But we will discover this at the very end of my presentation. The organism modifies the environment. Here is a beaver's dam, which is patently a deep modification of the environment, and as we have seen in the movie, this has a lot of consequences and implications for the surroundings of the operations of the beaver, but every living being modifies the environment to an extent or another. Here you see herbivores eating the grass, and just by the simple presence, these herbivores fertilize the grasslands. I don't enter into detail because it's evident how they can do this, but this is an effect of the presence of an environment in the environment. Moreover, an effect that is beneficial from the point of view of the environment. Here, this is another image which is not really very tasty, very beautiful, but it's essential for us as well, because these are so-called cyanobacteria, so they are better known by the name of blue algae, but they are not algae, they are bacteria, and they are not really blue, they are rather green, but they are known this way. So these are photosynthetic bacteria which use carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for their living practices, for their metabolisms, and produce oxygen. This process happened to a huge extent, about 2.5 billion years ago on Earth, and this is for this reason that we are here today. Because without this process in the atmosphere of the Earth, there would not have been any oxygen, so we couldn't survive. These are just byproduct of the presence of an organism into the environment, but organisms also have apt strategies to modify the environment, and I will discuss with you some examples. These are the cutting leaf ants, so a species of ant that essentially make a living cutting leaves. This is what they do all the day through. But doing this, they sensibly modify the ground of the wood where they inhabit, and so they have an incredibly powerful niche constructing effect. These are apt strategies. Another example is what I like to call the arsonist conifers, because I don't know if you've ever noticed that when there are conifers, very often there are just conifers. There's no other kind of vegetations, because the conifers have strategies to clean the ground in a way that they are virtually the only species of great trees present in their environment. They have strategies to make this happen. Of course, nesting is another important characteristic by which an organism is able to modify the environment to its advantage. Every bird builds nests. This is a nest of termites, which is taller than me, and by building these structures, they are able to control the temperature and the air flux within their nest. So these are ways in which organisms can modify the environment, and of course there are examples of tool using in the animal world. You can see a chimp fishing ants, a crow trying to get a larva of an insect from this wood, a macaque monkey trying to crack a nut with a stone, and an orangutan trying to fish with the stick. So these are still a higher level of apt strategies to modify the environment. Of course, you can imagine if this holds true for every kind of organisms, how much is true for the human being, which has an immensely greater power of intervening on its environment. But we will come to this later on. Let's turn to the other side of the coin, so the environment that modifies the organisms. This can happen downstream, I mean, with this expression, I mean in the course of generations, so actually via biological evolution, and specifically via natural selection. One often thinks of natural selection as a process lasting millions of years or billions of years, but there are studies, quite recent studies, showing that you can have effects of natural selection in few years, 10 years. This is a study by the Grants, who spent some 35 years on that island there in the Galapagos archipelagos, studying the average size of the beaks of the Darwin finch. And they noted that depending on the amount of rain falling on this island and consequently on the availability of seeds, softer or harder one, you can have an effect of natural selection that makes the average size of the beaks of these finches increase or decrease in a time span of about 5-10 years. So natural selection can be quite punctual in modifying the organism, but this is the environment that modifies. I mean, natural selection is not the natural force, it's just the effect of the interaction between the organism and the environment. But the most important, interesting thing I would like to stress to you is that the environment is able to modify the organism also upstream. I mean, during its development, in the single organism lifespan, so not in the course of biological evolution, but during the organism's grows up and develops. Some examples, twin honeybees. So you can see these are 3 honeybees which look very different from one another, but they are actually genetically identical because they are all part of the same family, let me say, which makes the difference between them because they look so different, because they are so different. Actually, because of the environment in which they grow. Because this difference depends on the fact that the queen is raised in a certain part of the nest, and the worker is raised in another part with different conditions and is fed with different food, and the same is true for the drone. So just this environmental difference induces morphological differences between these three exemplars, which are, I repeat, genetically identical. So the point here is that, the environment induces these differences. Here I can Here I can tell to you the story of these little Brazilian fishes. You can see here that you have two specimens of the same species of this fish here, and you have two specimens of this species of this fish here. So these come from the same river, actually, the Chanurco River in the south, in Venezuela, if I can remember properly. And they are of the same species, come from the same place, but you can see that they have a different shape. The shape of the body of these fishes is different. Why? Well, because they have been taken in different parts of this river. These specimens here come from the channel where the water flows continuously, and these other specimens here come from the lagoon when the water does not flow. This difference in the environment induces the differences in the body shape of these specimens, to the point that likely, because the data are not totally conclusive, but the idea is this one, is that if you take the offspring of this one and let this offspring grow in the environment of this one, the offspring of this will be much more similar to this than to their parents, because the environment is able to induce these differences in the morphology of the organism. Up to now, I have stressed differences in morphology, I mean in the shape, in the appearance of these organisms. But this effect of the environment can be much subtler and can even concern behavioral and cognitive aspects of animals. For example, here is this blue teal, which is drinking milk from a bottle. This is a documented case which happened in the 60s and 70s in Scotland. There are papers about this story. And so this teal learned to open the milk bottle and drink the milk which is within these bottles. Why? Because, of course, the teal didn't evolve to do this. Well, they learned to do that because in their environment, the Scotland of 50, 70 years ago, there was plenty of these bottles, because there were this very sustainable habit to leave the empty bottles in the thresholds of their houses, so that the morning after, the man of the milk will take the empty bottle and put the filled one on your threshold. So they had this availability, and at a certain point, some specimen of this blue teal invented this new way of making a living from a blue teal viewpoint. And moreover, the data are quite clear to say that this behavior, once invented from one pioneer exemplar of blue teal, has spread quite quickly all around Scottish. So this also stressed that these behaviors that are induced by an environmental aspect, feature, factor, parameter, can be copied, can be spread can be spread among a population of a certain kind of organism without waiting for genetic evolution to do the job, because they can learn this. Okay? And even in this case, you can imagine how much this is relevant for we human beings that learn a lot of things, invent a lot of things, and teach consistently, as we are doing just now. Let me first check the time, of course. Okay, now we are fine. Now I would like to show you another very short movie, just a couple of minutes, about what city crows are able to do. So let me do that.
Crows have become highly skilled at making a living in these new urban environments. In this Japanese city, they have devised a way of eating a food that normally they can't manage. Dropping a nut from a great height onto a hard road does sometimes crack it. But some nuts are particularly tough. So the crows have devised a better way. Drop it among the traffic. The problem now is collecting the bits without getting run over. So some birds have refined their technique. They station themselves beside pedestrian crossings. Wait for the lights to stop the traffic. Then collect your cracked nut in safety.
Okay, so this is just...
A colazione, con il caffè, come...
Sorry. Just to stress the same point. This is another skill. I mean, for a crow, this is a skill that has some cognitive challenge to be devised and learned, and which is induced by the environment, because they learn to profit from an environmental factor to get a new source of food. The point I would like to stress again here is that this is, this is clearly crows didn't evolve to profit from this environmental feature to get food, but they just profit from an environmental factor, and they learned to do this, and they spread to do that. Just to clarify, this is not just a movie made by, something just observing this, because this can be something happening by chance, but there's literature in this case as well, and I can share to you if you want, because this actually was a formal study conducted in Japan, in Sendai, in the year 2000 exactly, and there are many interesting aspects about that, because this behavior first emerged close to a driving school, where cars were used to move slowly, and so they can try to develop this behavior safely. Last point I want to stress, I just showed to you my previous lecture the video of the counting chimps. Now about that I would like just to stress that this is possible. The chimps were able to learn and develop this behavior which has its cognitive complications as well, only because they were in a dedicated environment. This is the Kyoto Primate Research Center, because of course in the Congo forests, a chimp couldn't have means to develop the skill. They need an environment, and this environment, along with, as we stressed last time, along with a human teacher who trained extensively these chimps, this could have happened. And this allows me to focus to another point, to stress another point, because in this point, in this example, the pedagogical aspect of the environment is still more evident, even because here, as I've just said, there's a human trainer involved. So these are the 2 points. Well, let me stay on this slide a little more. These are the 2 points I would like to stress. The organism-environment relationship is complex. The organism can modify the environment, usually modify the environment modifies the organism. The environment modifies the organism at the morphological level, but also at the cognitive and behavioral level. When this happens, very often, genetic evolution, biological evolution is not directly concerned. I mean, chimps, crows, teals, fish, or even beavers, we will see, do not need to evolve to let them be modified by the environment. Now, let me come back to the beaver for a moment, because the beaver is a rodent, as you know, but it has a lot of adaptations for an aquatic or a semi-aquatic lifestyle, because the beaver, as we have also seen, lives in water. Maybe, well, this is, I think, well known to all of you. Maybe not everyone knows that the ancestor of beavers were some kinds of this kangaroo rat, which lives in a very stony and arid environment, actually in the deserts. And so the issue is, the issue I would like to discuss with you for a while is how a kangaroo rat became a beaver. Because this brings us directly to the issue of evolution and how species evolve. Because up to 25, 30 years ago, the immediate answer would have been, well, there has been for sure some chanceful genetic mutations that accumulated to the point that a beaver-like organism came out, emerged, and so this newly emerged organism went to the river. But actually, nowadays, the answer is not so straight, because the idea rather is that is the opposite. I mean, is that organisms like this kangaroo rat became to live in an aquatic environment. So there's the first move is from the side of the organism, which changes its habits, and then evolution works downstream this behavioral change, this behavioral choice of the environment, up to the point to having this specific adaptation to the beaver. So this brings me to the 2 modes of evolution that I would like to briefly discuss with you. The first one is the neo-Darwinian synthesis, and I think this is the version, let me say, of biological evolution that you all have heard about in some sense or another. So it starts with the genetic mutations, which can happen in many ways, often when the DNA replicates during cell division, and so also during the formation of the gametes that will give rise to the next generation. But the idea is that the engine, the drive, the motive force of the evolution is genetic mutation. And this genetic mutation is usually considered to be chanceful, to be causal. And this is true, I think. But I think also it's important to understand in which sense biologists speak about causal genetic mutation, because when they say genetic mutation is chanceful, is causal, casual, they don't mean that this mutation don't have a cause, because we nowadays know a lot of causes of genetic mutations. What they mean specifically is that the phenotypic effects of this genetic mutation, when the mutation happens, are still all to be discovered. I mean, nobody knows if these mutations will be beneficial or detrimental to the organism, because when the mutation occurs, simply the organism is still developing, or in some cases it's still to begin its life, because the gametes still didn't match each other, and so the adaptive value of the mutation is impossible to know, because this depends on what the organism will do with this new mutation. In this sense, mutations are considered as chanceful. So first step, genetic mutation, chanceful genetic mutation. Second step, natural selection. Natural selection, so the organisms with their DNA, with their genome, which in a sense specifies the traits that this organism has, face the environment. And if these organisms have fit traits, like for example these insects here, they will survive better than others and will spread their genome. If they have traits that are not adaptive, so for example they are very visible so that predators can feed on it, they will tend to live worse and to reproduce less, so this character tend to disappear in time. This can be seen in a variety of ways. So first step, genetic mutation. Second step, natural selection. Consider that natural selection can be fine, in a sense, can be subtle, as we have seen, up to the point of fixing the optimal range of a certain trait. For example, in mammals, the length of the legs is proportional to the top velocity an organism can develop. So a cheetah must have reasonably long length to be able to catch the gazelle. However, a too long leg will be a very fragile one, and a cheetah with a broken leg is a dead cheetah in 24 hours, more or less. So natural selection works to fix the optimal range of the length of the cheetah. For example, this holds true for many other organisms and processes. The framework is this. There's a gene-based developmental program which specifies the characteristics of the organism, the traits of the organisms. The organism with its traits face the environment, interacts with the environment, and it's here that natural selection has its effect, let me say, probing, testing the fitness of the organisms, and through this, evolution goes on. This is the first mode. But nowadays, there are objections to this. Evolutionary biologists tend to interpret the process of biological evolution in another way. To sum up the new Darwinian synthesis, we can say that that biological evolution goes on along three steps: variation production, variation transmission, and variation selection. The variation production, according to the new Darwinian synthesis, depends on genetic change and mutations. The variation of transmission, the transmission of variation is essentially the genetic inheritance. So what the parents pass to the offspring in terms of the genome. And the selection of variation actually is natural selection, so this probing of the fitness of the organisms. The environment is the key for fitness, is what establishes the degree of fitness of an environment. It's conceived as essentially selective and as essentially uncontrollable by the organism. And besides this, there still remains this idea of the developmental program according to which the organism will become what it actually has to become. Well, the new idea, the new framework to understand the evolutionary synthesis, which is called the extended evolutionary synthesis, still concerns biological evolution according to variation production, variation transmission, and variation selection. But the way in which this new synthesis conceives these processes is completely different, radically different from the new Darwinian synthesis. Because according to the extended evolutionary synthesis, variation, the production of variation is not just genetic. I mean, to have interesting biological novelty, to have novel traits, to have novel behaviors, to have novel cognitive attitudes, you don't need to wait for genetic mutations to produce this. Because this novelty, this biologically relevant novelty, can emerge also at the phenotypic level, also at the behavioral level, and also at the cognitive level. This is what we have seen so far. I mean, the examples that I have showed to you about the nice animals and plants I have discussed with you shows this process. Because we have seen examples in which phenotypic novelty, behavioral novelty, and cognitive novelty emerge without the need to wait for genetic mutations. And moreover, we have also seen that some of this novelty can be positively induced by the environment. So the role of the environment in this framework is no longer just selective, okay? Also, as far as variation transmission is concerned, even in this case, according to the extended evolutionary synthesis, this transmission is not just genetic again. Of course, you have the passing over of the genome from parents to offspring, but you also have epigenetic inheritance, which I don't want to focus on it because it's very technical, but it's not here the real point. But it's also behavioral, in the sense that a lot of animals pass from generation to generation behavior, even novel behavior, at the behavioral level. Because organisms can learn from other organisms by many mechanisms of social learning. And also, and this is interesting for us, I think, the extended evolutionary synthesis acknowledged that transmission of variation, of novelty, can also happen via symbolic channels. And this is culture, actually the key topic we addressed in my previous lecture. A very interesting point, which is key, especially to the lecture of today, which is focused on ecology, is that the extended evolutionary synthesis also stresses the environmental transmission and captures this in the label of ecological inheritance. This means that among the many things that the new offspring can inherit from the parent offspring, there's also the environment. There's also the environment with the modifications that the parent generation has imposed to it. To the extent to which many biologists are convinced that even the parent-offspring similarity nowadays depends to a great extent to this ecological inheritance. In the sense that, just to explain me, the fact that the offspring of a lemon tree looks like the parent lemon tree, of course depends on the genome of the lemon, of course depends on epigenetic inheritance, but also depends on the fact that the offspring lemon tree inherits environment of the parent generation with the modifications that this generation imposes to the environment. And even the selection of variation, of course, is in a sense still natural selection. But here the environment is no longer considered as independent of the organism, because we have seen that the organisms have extensive niche constructing abilities, so they can modify their environment in a way that helps them to manage with the environmental challenges. It is not, it is in part controlled by the organism, exactly for the same reason, because the organism can modify it. It's no longer just selective, because it can induce biological novelties, and it is, in a sense, transmitted and inherited. So this is the new outlook. These are some key words. So the standard evolutionary synthesis stresses the niche construction, the phenotypic plasticity, so the idea that novelty can emerge also at a genuinely phenotypical level without involving genetic mutation, and the ecological inheritance. And this stresses what current life sciences label as the organism-environment complementarity. So nowadays, these two sides of the coin, the organism and the environment, are seen as intermingled between each other. Okay, just to mention, this is an historically interesting detail. The last book by Charles Darwin is this one, is The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, with observations on the habits. So this is a book on the earthworms, which is the last book Darwin wrote. The point here is that Darwin was shocked, was struck by the ability of the earthworms to modify the soil. Nowadays we know that earthworms are organisms which essentially have an aquatic physiology. So they have a physiology typical of an organism living in water. And they get on land, so they became animals living on Earth some 200 million years ago. But they were able to keep the aquatic physiology exactly because they are able to modify the environment in a way that allows them to keep this physiology. Well, it is in this way, so it is according, in my view, to the extended evolutionary synthesis approach, that the kangaroo rat became a beaver. So not because of chanceful genetic mutations and natural selection, but according to a process which is captured by the extended evolutionary synthesis. It is in this way that the earthworm remains an aquatic physiology being or animal, and in some sense at least, and this is the second part of my presentation today, it is in this way that the human being emerged and became what we know. But we will see this after the break. So this is I left you on the screen with this spot on the Anthropocene. Well, at this point, this is really an advertisement, a spot of an event we will run this weekend. This is actually a closed event, I mean, addressed to the members of our school, which we promote at the DISP Center. But this roundtable on Saturday evening at 5:30 p.m. is public. So if you want to come, you're welcome. And the issue is this. But the spot is not just on our event, which is important, but it's not the key point, but is in the notion of the Anthropocene as such. And here I would like to get, eventually, some of you might say, to the properly human dimension. I know that maybe you can question the fact that I've talked to you about teals, beavers, chimps, and other kinds of creatures. But in my view, this is one of the challenges about the issue of ecology as it is discussed today. And it is also a way to root our anthropological constitution in the environment in which we live. And we will see some further hint about that later on. What is the Anthropocene? Well, the Anthropocene is the proposal to name the current geological era of planet Earth with this name, which stresses the fact, or the idea, the assumption, the hypothesis, that the human being and its activities have become a key geological, ecological force able to affect the global state of planet Earth, and to a sense even beyond, because we now, you know better than me, are able to travel in the open space and to send probes here and there. The term, the word was proposed in this paper, published on the Global Change newsletter in the year 2000 by these two scholars. Paul Crutzen is a Nobel Prize in chemistry, I think 1980 and something. Of course, nowadays, around the issue of the Anthropocene, there are catastrophic nuances, because the Anthropocene is in a way or another connected with climate change, the dramatic biodiversity loss we are experiencing, the dangerous effects of the geochemical earth cycles, so the acidification of soil, the loss of oxygen in the water, and the enormous production of plastics we are performing, in a sense, and also the dramatic change we causes to habitat and landscapes. And many of these effects are anthropic, so there's some problem, objectively. I can give you some quick note about the extension of the problem. So experts esteem that every year in this period we lose 11,000 to 58,000 species on Earth each year. Many of them are insect species, but this is a huge number in a sense. I don't know how many of you knows that of all the terrestrial mammals nowadays living on planet Earth, 60% of them are essentially what we eat, so domesticated animals. 36% are we, human beings, ourselves, and all the rest is just the 4% of the terrestrial mammals on our planet nowadays. And then we built megalopolis. In the year 1900, there were one single city with 5 million inhabitants, which was London, and 30 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants. 2 years ago, the situation were this one. So these are interesting figures that give us a measure, a perception of the Anthropocene in its catastrophic, let me say, nuance. But this catastrophic nuance is not necessary, and we should not abandon ourselves to this. Because at the very roots of the proposal of the word Anthropocene, there are these two guys, which are two Catholic priests. Antonio Stoppani, who was a geologist, and already in the last part of the 19th century, proposed the idea that the planet Earth was in the Anthropozoic era, so the era of the human animal, in a sense. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin proposed almost one century after, the idea that with the human being, actually the creation, the cosmos, the universe, entered the noosphere, the world of thought, which is our world, in a sense. So the catastrophic implications of the Anthropocene, which are real to an extent, and we should not forget this, are not necessary. And we should try to reverse the trend, let me say. So, some quick flashback to my previous lecture. Here is a representation, a sketch on cultural evolution. And of course, it is through this process that we acquired this huge power of affecting our environment to the point to become a geological, ecological force able to affect the state of the planet Earth. I would like also to remember one of the definitions of culture that I gave to you taken by the Gaudium spes. So the word culture in its general sense indicates everything whereby man develops and perfects his many bodily and spiritual qualities. He strives by his knowledge and his labor to bring the world itself under his control. This was written 50 years ago, 57, yeah, 55, so about 50 years ago in 1965. He renders a social life more human, both in the family and in the civic community, through improvement of customs and institutions. We should not forget this nowadays. Throughout the course of time, he expresses, communicates, and conserves his works, great spiritual experiences, and desires that they might be of advantage to the progress of many, even of the whole human family. So I think we should try to make our best to read the Anthropocene according to these insights, rather than the purely catastrophic ones. I also remember once again this model of cultural evolution, in which the stress is on the fact that the cultural dimension can back affect on the cognitive level and on the anatomical level of the human being. And I think that after the first part of this lecture, you can grasp some deeper implications of this, because this is nowadays consistent with the way in which we look at the biological evolution in general and with the specifics of the human being. Cultural exaptation, so we are able to change ourselves, modifying aspects, our cognitive constitution, modifying parts of the environment, and we are also able, through cultural neural use, to modify our brain after, because of our cultural practices. I would like also to remember the issue of the wants versus needs, which was one of the key points of my previous lectures, and these should be included in our account of how human beings evolve, because if evolution is regarded according to the extended evolutionary synthesis, this opens up the space for this dimension to be effective and operating at the level of the human evolution. And this is extremely important in my view. Let me also recall another flashback with which I about concluded my last lecture, which is this insight by Karl Rahner: the Christian is absolutely justified and qualified, and indeed to a certain extent obliged to take an active part in working for the progress of the human race and thus of the world, by developing his own immanent powers and those of the world. And I also think that this quotation, in the light of what we have seen in the first hour of this lecture, can acquire further meaning and implications. Let me also try to offer some hope in the face of the Anthropocene and its catastrophic implications. So this is Lynn White, the author of a very, let me say, almost harsh paper published on Science in 1967, so 2 years after the Gaudium spes, in which he reflected about the historical roots of our ecological crisis. And I don't know if you know this paper. This is also a paper which accuses, in some sense, the Judeo-Christian tradition to be responsible for this ecological crisis, but I don't want to enter this point, which is worth discussing, but it's not my point today. But at the center point of this article, he wrote this: since the roots of our trouble, the ecological trouble, are so largely religious, he says, the remedy must also be essentially religious, whether we call it that or not. And from the context of the paper, it can be understood that for religious, he means it means what concerns the fundamental level of the place and role of humanity in the universe, if we name it scientifically, in the world, if we name it philosophically, or in creation, if we name it theologically, in a sense. And then I want to give you another very important hint for me, drawn by Philip Hefner, who in 1993 wrote a book titled The Human Factor, Evolution, Culture, and Religion. He proposed in this book the notion of created co-creators. We should be us, human beings. Human beings are God's created co-creators, whose purpose is to be the agency acting in freedom to birth the future that is most wholesome for the nature that has birthed us. The nature that is not only our own genetic heritage, but also the entire human community and the evolutionary and ecological reality in which and to which we belong. Exercising this agency is said to be God's will for humans. So this is the deepest sense I can find of the Anthropocene in a hopeful and positive perspective or attitude. And it is here that I root my proposal of a pedagogical ecology. So of moving from an ecological pedagogy, environmental education, so we must respect the environment because it is good in itself to respect the environment, to the reverse perspective, the perspective that the environment has a pedagogical role upon us. This is the key point. So we have seen that the organism modifies the environment, that the environment modifies the organisms downstream and upstream. We have seen the strict organism-environment complementarity following from the very recent developments in the life sciences. My proposal is that in this framework, the human being can be regarded as the species, very likely the only species, that modifies the environment to the aim of modifying itself. This is the pedagogical role of that the environment can play upon the human being. So if we want to grow in our humanity, and please think also to my previous lecture and all what this implies, we very likely cannot do that without passing through the environment, without modifying the environment. And please also reflect on the fact that for us human beings, the environment is not just nature in the raw. The environment is our institutions, is our cities, is our schools, is our law systems, is our hospitals, is everything surrounds us. This is our environment. And so if we want to grow ourselves, we cannot do this but by passing through the environment. And in this way, the environment can play a pedagogical role upon ourselves. Comments later on. Actually, in many of our environments, we can see, after the premises, I hope, can be helpful to this, we can see this role, because the workplace is a pedagogical environment. It is not just a place where we perform our activities. It's also the place where we pass, where we transmit our activities. The family is another pedagogical place. This is not just the place where we care for our offspring, but it's the place where we educate them, when we lend occasions for them to grow, to become more and more humans. The school, of course, is an institution designed, planned to do that. But it's an environment. I mean, you can do school. I mean, this would open up even reflections about the online teaching. But these are places. I mean, these are places that we modify. The academia, the universities, the churches, as I've already said. These are pedagogical places, and these are places that we modify. So these are modified environmental portions of the human being through which we educate ourselves, we teach to ourselves, we change ourselves, and hopefully we let ourselves grow and become more and more human. Upon this, I would like to insert what I like to call, as a proposal, the pedagogical criterion for ecology. Because you know that there are nowadays huge discussions about how we should approach our environment. So the issue of sustainability, of the environmental ethics, of the aesthetics of the environment, of economy, and how these should interact with the resources, with the natural environment, and with all these kind of things. But I think that the key role can be played nowadays by the realization that the changes that we brought about, or that we simply cause to the environment, should be assessed explicitly for their pedagogical role. So, which message the modifications that we cause into the environment passes through our fellow human beings, through the ones living there, to our future generations. This is the key point, in my view. Clearly, these two environments passes two very different messages. Not just sociologically, not just economically, but pedagogically. I mean, people growing in this environment will get effects that are quite different from people growing in that environment. And this holds true also for smaller environments as well. Okay, these two rooms pass different messages to the ones living in it. And this is something we should realize. The quicker we realize this, the better it will be for us, essentially, I think. I think that this lecture, well, you know that this course has been designed by a master, Professor Tanzalanitti, so you can imagine it's well planned. And so it is not by chance that this lecture I've offered to you today is exactly in between lectures 10 and 11 on the Book of Nature, and before the last lecture of this cycle, which will be about the role of Christian revelation in the birth of Western culture. Because what I propose today is just the bridging between these two. Because the Book of Nature is a way to grasp the idea that nature can teach us, can enlighten us. And the next lecture will show to you, will unweigh to you how Christian revelation has had a very positive role in the framing of the Western culture with many beautiful things, the hospitals, the universities, the first banks, and many other things. But these things, according to the view I'm proposing to you today, are environmental in a sense. I mean, we cannot build an hospital in the world of ideas. We need to build them somewhere, with some stones, with tools in it, okay? So I think that, what I'm proposing to you today can help you to bridge the issue of the Book of Nature to the issue of the role of the Christian revelation in the birth of Western culture, and maybe in a larger context, given the globalization that we are realizing. So I'm about to conclude, but given that, the issue of ecology immediately calls to our minds the encyclical Laudato Si of Pope Francis, I wanted to read to you two passages from this encyclical, which in my view are enlightening, even, downward the path we have followed today. In number 98, the Pope's writing, talking about Jesus Christ, says, Jesus lived in full harmony with creation, and others were amazed. What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? His appearance was not that of an ascetic set apart from the world, nor of an enemy of the pleasant things of life. Of himself, he said, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. And they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard. He was far removed from philosophies which despised the body, matter, and the things of the world. And then the Pope continues, such unhealthy dualisms, nonetheless, left a mark on certain Christian thinkers in the course of history and disfigured the gospel. These are strong passages, I think. Jesus worked with his hands in daily contact with the matter created by God, to which he gave form by his craftsmanship. It is striking that most of his life was dedicated to this task in a simple life which awakened no admiration at all. Is it not this the carpenter, the son of Mary? Mark 6:3. In this way, he sanctified human labor and endowed it with a special significance for our development. I think there are many deep insights in these passages, from more philosophical ones to more existential ones, which are worth reflecting about the issue of ecology nowadays. Because I think that when the Pope envisaged this encyclical, I mean, this was one of the key points he had in mind in developing it. And again, this is in a sense even more interesting. Number 216. Here, the Pope would like to offer Christians a few suggestions for an ecological spirituality, grounded in the convictions of our faith, since the teachings of the gospel have direct consequences for our way of thinking, feeling, and living. More than in ideas or concepts as such, I'm interested in how such a spirituality can motivate us to a more passionate concern for the protection of our world. A commitment this lofty cannot be sustained by doctrine alone, without a spirituality capable of inspiring us, without an interior impulse which encourages, motivates, nourishes, and gives meaning to our individual and communal affectivity. Admittedly, Christians have not always appropriated and developed the spiritual treasures bestowed by God upon the Church, where the life of the Spirit is not dissociated from the body, or from nature, or from worldly realities, but lived in and with them, in communion with all that surrounds us. So, in concluding, so we have plenty of space to discuss, and I will listen to your comments, objections, protests, and so on and so forth. But we are here exactly for this, to let us grow possibly together. I would like to leave you with the last spot about what I think it's really about integral in integral ecology. There's literature about this. There's a huge amount of papers about that, about how integral ecology should be understood. But I think that one dimension of this is a kind of attitude, but we have seen them explicitly in the quotations I've reported to you. So an opposition to kinds of dualism between the human being and nature and the environment, and between the mind spirit and the body matter. So I think that one sense to understand the integral of integral ecology is to try to keep together these components all together. Of course, without confusing them. The spiritual dimension is not the material one, and the environment is not a human being, but this must be kept together. And only at this condition we will be able, I think, to work for the futures of creation in the way Philipp Hefner, Karl Rahner, Teilhard de Chardin, and many other thinkers suggested here and there in the history of human, of Western thinking. So thank you very much. I conclude here. Please.
There seems to be many critical theorists who see the different biases that are imbued in the environments and in the institutions, and they say, oh, there's certain biases that are in the structures, in this, the systemic issue. And there seems to be movements that just want to destroy all structures without offering a positive contribution and some positive
Well, thanks for this issue. This gets to a kind of political, sociological milieu, which is not my expertise field. But I think that, first of all, what you say is true. There are many people that advance criticisms to many systems, structures, political, institutional, educational, without offering alternatives. This is something that should not be done. I learned this, well, I can find the English word. I learned this lesson, okay? I learned this lesson from philosophy of science. And in the relationships between Kuhn and Lakatos. So Kuhn, with his proposal of scientific revolutions, exactly proposed that when a theory unveils troubles, you just have to throw it away and wait for a new one. And Lakatos answered him, well, but this is not what happens actually in the history of science, because no science gives away a theory without having an alternative already in his or her hands to continue the work. So, of course, destroying structures without alternatives would imply just the paralysis of our system. I don't know if this is something interesting to add, but I think that the convictions of our faith, in my view, could be some interesting alternatives to be proposed to some, I mean, of these criticisms. But this will not convince everybody, I'm afraid. Thank you. Yes, please.
So, although there are many efforts to create some kind of ecological awareness and improvement of the environment around us, at the same time, it seems like there are philosophies which are at the base of our understanding of the human person, which show that we believe we can manipulate the human person, we can manipulate what it might be feeling, et cetera. So the two of those things, according to your proposal, seem to be going in different directions.
Well, actually, the first time that this idea came to my mind was when I was preparing a lecture on posthumanism. Because posthumanism, you know what I talk about. Posthumanism, I think, implies exactly this kind of issue. Because you cannot think of mind uploading, so of the idea of taking my mind and upload it in a computer, if you do not perceive these two things as essentially disjoint to one another, okay? And then I try to generalize this, because if this is true from about these two dimensions, well, all the discourse that I try to present to you about the the organism-environment complementarity shows this in a similar way with respect to the idea that you cannot conceive a human person disjoining, separating these two aspects. You cannot even conceive neither the human person nor creation in general disjoining these two parts. So I think the roots of these two, if you want, the roots of the Anthropocene from one side and of posthumanism from another are essentially the same, I think. Even though the implications might seem quite far away from one another, I think that the root is in these kinds of misconceptions here.
Very interesting. So then, as if that doesn't get resolved, philosophy becomes united, do you not see the environment and the care for creation improving?
Yeah, I think so, because you know, I think that the links, I mean, it should be not too difficult to acknowledge the strict interrelation between the mind and the body, to use the classical terms. And I also think that it should not be very difficult to see the links between the environment and the body. Huh? Okay, the trick is to try to keep all the three together. Yes, please.
I asked you something about the pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting, but also I for some clarifications.
Yes.
I asked myself, it's similar to, in a certain sense, to the efforts in social engineering, in a certain sense. This your idea of pedagogy. But of course, there is a huge difference because in pedagogy there is a master, and I asked myself, who is the master of this kind of pedagogy? Because you choose this word, and I think there are a lot of meanings, a lot of suggestions, but we can explore also.
So this is thank you. This is an interesting and deep issue. I'm afraid I will not be able to give you a full answer to your question. However, first of all, social engineering is a very interesting process which would deserve deep studies. But I think in a sense, this is something I'm thinking just now, in a sense, this is also another effect of this kind of these joinings. Because when you think in terms of social engineering, you are extremely focusing on obtaining some specific effects, which are expression of interests of a part who plans the social engineering activities. Whereas here, there's the issue of the integral level that is involved. Second issue of the masters. Well, of course, we need good masters. But of course, this issue, because in a sense, following the approach I have tried to develop, you can even perceive aspects of mastery in creation. This was my link about the Book of Nature issue, okay? So nature can teach us something. And the other point is that if this idea of the pedagogical, let me also add, integral ecology has some sense, it has this if considers an integral perspective on the human being. So there the interest should not be the partial interest of a group of people, but should be the interest of humanity as a whole. These are the hints I can give to you, but maybe we will discuss further this point. Thank you. Yes, please. The action, what, in creation? Well, in creation, in the idea of creatio continua. God is everywhere here. Okay? But I also would like to add that God, as far as I can understand, I'm not a theologian, you know, is also extremely respectful of creation. And the more so, the higher is the level of creation you consider. So when you get the level of a free personal being, this respect is higher and higher. And so this, I can envisage inclines God to be extremely respectful of what we do, of ourselves. Otherwise, of course, we will be in some difficulties to come to terms with this, in a sense. Huh? Yes, please.
If in religion context, you would say that reason, the root of all these things are the original sin. The problem that what is the corresponding point in philosophy? For example, what do philosophers say about this ethic area? Let's say that it is tendency of human beings to behave in this way, perhaps the way they have.
Interesting question. Maybe, I don't know. One idea that comes into my mind is that, scholastic philosophy often, even perhaps not always, conceptualize many of the bad behaviors of the human being as a genuine mistake. I mean, taking something sub specie boni. So we just might think that all this is good for us because we can see the immediate advantages, but we don't realize that in the long term we are ruining the relationships among the whole. Of course, this can be conceptualized as the consequences of the original sin, and there the issue is how to conceive the original sin, but we have had a lecture on this by Oscar Iuricala, so he gave you hints to come to terms to this point. Actually, which is the philosophical counterpart of the original sin, really, I'm afraid I don't know. Well, I don't know if some other philosophers here have some idea, but I don't know. Maybe because the original sin is a genuinely theological concept, but theological or religious, or I mean, faith-related concept, let me say. Yes, please.
I have a question about the role of the group, the social groups in all of this. In the last slide, you have this environment and the mind and body of an individual, but in basically all the examples you provided us, the protagonist of the changes on the environment or the changes by the environment are a group of animals or of people. And even in cases where there is an individual, like the grow waste rate in the nut, the benefits and the survival is by the entire group, by teaching or by the role of the group, of the society, if you want, in all of these.
Thank you. This is a very important issue. Let me confess that when I inserted this slide in this presentation, which happened very early this morning, as you may imagine, I thought to include more than one human being in the figure. But I was too lazy to do that. So I thought, well, okay, one is enough. But I totally agree with you. Here there's also a genuinely social dimension that must be taken into account. So I totally agree with you. Next slide, that there will be more than one human being in the figure. However, let me add one comment. It's true, I think, that many of these processes and dynamics have an impossible to, have a key social dimension. However, even in the examples of the animals that we have focused on, of course, there's social learning, there's spreading and transmission of the ability, but very likely in all these cases, there's a pioneer individual who escogitates the behavior. And yeah, this is meaningful because, I don't know if you remember the slide of my previous lecture about the Darwinian shamans. Huh? Well, generally there's one shaman in a group, no more. So you must have some pioneer individual, and then the process gets and makes sense in a social dimension. But I would not like to completely dilute the personal, individual, or subjective dimension in the social one, which must be taken into account, of course, but doesn't exhaust all the story. I don't know if my answer is meaningful. I hope so. Yes, please. Maybe you can use this one.
Just to thank Ivan for this wonderful lecture and for the main implication it has for our life, no? because he demonstrated us that our life is highly dependent from the environment we have around us. It means that the growing of a child depends on the family he or she has around. It depends that the work of an intellectual depends on the school, on the tradition, intellectual tradition that you have around. And we are also, we have also the power to influence on the environment, and we are influenced by the environment. Think, for instance, to the implication for moral theology. A virtue can grow only if there are boundary conditions which helps the growing of a virtue and many other things, no? I think that these kind of insight are very fruitful and not yet well developed in theological reflection, in philosophical reflection, in a sense. No, we have a good reflection on the role of relations in human life. No, there is a movement years ago to give more importance to the relations in human life. But this is more than simply relations. It's our relation with the environment and our relation with all the other people. So I'm very happy that today this kind of discourses emerge. And if we want to know more, we have to attend the round table on next Saturday evening. Okay. Okay, thank you.